So we will call to order this special meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Housing Authority of the County of Monterey on Monday, December 6th, 2021 at 6 p.m. Can we have a roll call, please?
Chair Wizard.
Present.
Vice Chair Buter.
Present.
Viviana Gama.
Present.
Commissioner Paul Miller will join us later. Commissioner Francine Goodwin will probably join us later. Commissioner Kathleen Ballesteros.
Present.
And Commissioner Kevin Healy.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Can I ask you, Darlene, in your last meeting with us, to lead the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Spectacular. So at this time, we will open the floor to public comment. If there is anyone on the Zoom or having called in wishing to make comments not on items agendized later on, we would hear them now.
No one on the phone.
Thank you so much. And I see that there's no one else in the Zoom, so we'll just wait a minute in case people are running late, and then we will move the agenda. Okay, well, we will, if someone comes in the next couple of minutes, we'll try to accommodate them. And for now, we'll move to item 4A, updates from the Strategic Recruitment Ad Hoc Committee. So I'll just briefly introduce this item. Commissioner Ballesteros, Vice Chair Buter, and I have been meeting, it seems like often. Oh, and Darlene, of course, have been meeting often to sort of prepare the other commissioners for, trying to offer some solutions, trying to kind of think through how we can move expeditiously as Ms. Sturgeon transitions away from HACM. And so we have been making some progress. And this item, I wanted to have this item first so that it would inform items B and C. Otherwise, I thought it might be kind of, a little bit of like a zigzag with trying to talk about the new things we've discussed in item B and then kind of shifted a little bit and talk on item C. So we're going to kind of give you the framework through item A, and then in B and C, we'll have some more discussion and some decisions to make. I would say, though, that in item A, there is sort of an open-ended question of what we might like to do in a more general sense. And so I think it would be appropriate for item A to, after we have our discussion, or at least an introduction, to table it and then come back after item C, maybe after item D, for that more generalized decision making. But I think the information in A is important to understand item B and C. I guess let's start with Vice Chair Buter. Why don't you tell us just high level kind of where we're at in terms from the commissioner's perspective, and then we'll have Darlene talk about the conversations she's had with HUD and various professional folks that she's been in touch with. Does that sound okay with you, Hans?
Yeah.
Great, go ahead, take it away.
And remind me again who 8315955.
That's Viviana.
It's Viviana, perfect. Okay, so Kevin and Viviana, we've basically been out doing some networking, with folks in the affordable housing and housing authority fields over the past couple of weeks. We've connected with a variety of executive directors kind of all over the country, from the guy that runs New York City and San Diego, Alameda County, Oakland, just to try to get a sense of, hey, what would you do in our situation? And, you know, we got feedback on a couple of fronts. One was that, you know, potentially there's an opportunity to go with a consultant, and we got the names of kind of the leading consulting firms in the industry that can do sort of staff augmentation, and, you know, on short notice can kind of seat an interim executive director and, you know, sort of really any other staffing needs that you might have. And so we have, you know, 2 or 3 firms along those lines that, you know, we can throw those names out, you know, tonight as we sort of talk about some of our discussions. And so that's kind of one avenue that's come up, and we are in fact pretty far down the road in terms of exploring that. You know, we have I think Darlene has a couple calls tomorrow, and then, you know, we have a call on Wednesday with another consultant. And when we say consultant, we don't mean somebody who's hanging a shingle. We mean serious, you know, these are the class A major consulting firms in the industry that we've cross-referenced with a bunch of folks who know what they're talking about. So that's sort of one possibility that we're thinking about. You know, to back up, I think there's sort of like 3 needs that we've identified. One is eventually we need to find an executive director permanent executive director. So we've been looking for search firms that have specific track records and specializations in housing authority management team searches. And so we have a couple of kind of lead candidates, I'd say, on that front. Then if you back up from the kind of full-time ED search, there's the interim ED that we need to find. And then if you back up from that, Darlene leaves on Thursday. And so then the question sort of becomes, well, what does the world look like between when Darlene leaves and the period of time in which it takes us to find an interim executive director? So conceptually, those are sort of the 3 buckets that I think about this problem in. And I think it would be helpful for us to probably tonight come to a conclusion on at least the first one. I think we have really good leads on the last one, which is the ultimate executive director search. We've got a couple of good search firms, but it's probably a 6-month process. On the front end, you know, bridging us until we get an interim executive director placed, you know, I think feels like there's a couple of options. One would be to engage one of these consultants, you know, for a couple weeks, for example, until we can get an interim ED, or potentially to contract back with Darlene, just to keep kind of the train moving down the tracks and, you know, all the I's dotted and T's crossed until that time that we get that interim ED, again, short term. And in terms of that middle piece of finding the interim ED, there's, you know, there's a few options. Again, one is these consulting firms. So we know one of the consulting firms already has a candidate. You know, it's the person who runs program management, the guy that runs the staff augmentation sort of division for them. So they'll go in and, you know, I get some of the firms confused, but like they'll go in, I think right now they're running, you know, the housing choice voucher program for the San Francisco Housing Authority, for example, and they've got a pot of people and they just, you know, do that. And so the guy that runs that program, that's managing all these programs around the country, he's in San Diego. That's an opportunity, just as an example. So we want to flesh out, you know, another consultant or two to see, hey, what, and that's these meetings over the next couple of days. So that's the sort of consultant option on the interim executive director piece. The next piece I would say is there is one of the search firms, there's a guy who sort of specializes specifically in housing authority search. And there's a possibility that he could help. I mean, he maintains a list of dozens, up to 100 people who are out there looking, and so could potentially help us do a placement, in short order. Now, we're supposed to be potentially talking to him, tomorrow, to just get a sense of, his timing. So within the next couple of days, we'll have, some more info here. And the last piece I would say on the interim ED piece is just through our networking, with some of these leaders in the industry, some names have just surfaced in terms of people who are retired, who've gone out and recently retired EDs, who've sort of gone out and become consultants or just have recently retired. And so we have a list of 3, 4, 5 names of folks, some of whom we've just sort of talked to on a very preliminary basis about the work that they do, just to kind of get a feel for who they are, not in any sort of formal sense, obviously. And so that's another sort of route, and you could merge that sort of individual route potentially with this search firm individual, where we could just potentially do a search for an interim executive director on a very short-term basis, and just in the contract carve out some of the names that we've already identified, so that if we ultimately go with one of those people, we're not paying somebody for kind of work that we've already done. So basically, consultant or individuals, or a search firm on a very short fuse to find an interim ED. So again, to back up full tilt, I think we kind of know where we're headed on the full-time search. It's going to take 6 months. One of these good search firms, this middle piece I just talked about, I do think maybe a good place to start, and Darlene, you're going to obviously add whatever updates you have, like John mentioned, but to me, it feels like a good place to start would be to think about the front end of that sort of 3-phase process, which is, once Darlene leaves, what do we do until we seat an interim ED?
Thanks, Hans. And I want to make sure that, Kathleen, do you have any perspective to add? I know that, Hans, just for the group's benefit, led a lot of the outreach and networking work to kind of co-locate all of the various pieces of information. But I want to make sure, Kathleen, if you wanted to add any other perspective or thoughts, that you had the opportunity.
Thank you, Chair Wizard. So first I want to say I enjoy working with the chair and Vice Chair Buter and Darlene. We had some interesting meetings, and I do want to commend Hans, because he got a lot of the contacts. I was able to reach out to 2, but I didn't really get a response from them, probably because they're busy with their regular duties. But we tackled a lot of the hard stuff, where do we start? What do we do? And considering too, also other stuff, what's on the agenda too, regarding the Board of Supervisors. Sorry about that background. So what I just want to say is that we did spend a lot of time. We did have very good meetings. We discussed a lot of items. These search firms, discussing, everything that, we have to follow the process. Darlene really helped us with that. There's steps that we have to take. And one of the things we have to remember, we're not the only housing authority that is going through this. There are others. So that kind of felt a little better, but, still, we knew that we were given a responsibility as the ad hoc committee. And let me tell you, we didn't take it for granted. It's a heavy load to carry, and I appreciate Darlene helping us out. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Kathleen. Darlene, do you want to take it from there regarding sort of the more, what's the right way to say, some of the more like technical and formal aspects of what that search yielded?
Yeah. So the biggest concern is obviously I've been communicating with HUD San Francisco and, addressing whatever concerns they have and taking whatever assistance they are offering. So the major concern is that we do our procurement appropriately for this. So we've had a lot of meetings about procurement and how we would do this. The main concern, obviously, we don't want to violate procurement, so that's important, but it's important to always have an ED or an interim in seat because our contract with HUD flows through the executive director, and that person is the one that signs for everything. So that is their concern, that we maintain that, umbilical cord, let's say, to the agency. So we've reached out to different consultants. So I just wanted to make sure everybody kind of understood the process that Hans went over. So a consultant, we're looking at a consultant to do a interim short-term placement, while the other consultant looks for the permanent placement. So there's two different ones going on. So we're vetting out those. I have a meeting tomorrow with the consultant that would do the short-term interim placement to get an idea of timeline, pool of talent they have available, all of the little things, because we can't really establish a timeline of how this is going to flow until we know what the consultants have in their stable of individuals. So, and again, like Kathleen said, we're not the only housing authority going through this. There's lots of housing authorities that don't have EDs or deputies right now, and they're operating with interims. But HUD wants an idea of like what our game plan is, who's going to be the signer, who's going to be delegating authority, going into ELOCs, pulling money down, submitting the VMS. Those things are critical. What is our short-term plan and our long-term plan? And then also, while we're doing this ED search, we are also looking for solutions for the director of finance piece. The director of HR, we already have a consultant in place. So we're using the consultant that assisted with our union negotiations, because that individual and that firm, they know our MOU inside out, they know the union representatives, and they know a lot of the HR issues we have. So that was a natural fit there. So I have another meeting with BDO, which would be a potential contract for some intermittent or interim financial director of finance or controllership that they could assist us with. So that's kind of where we're at until we have these meetings to establish what our true timeline would be. But the main concern was when we get into our conversation about items B and C, because that also ties into our action steps and what we do next.
So I think that is sort of a good foundation for what we're going to discuss items B and C. So I think it's appropriate, let me take a step back. I would love, and it would also be appropriate for someone to move to table item A so that we can make those higher level decisions after we've gotten into the weeds of B and C, if there was someone willing to do that.
I make a motion to table item A under new business.
Second.
Great, it's been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we will vote. Roll call, please.
Okay, Chair Wizard.
Aye.
Vice Chair Buter.
Yes.
Commissioner Gama.
Yes.
Commissioner Ballesteros.
Yes.
And Commissioner Healy.
Yes.
Okay.
Great, that motion passed unanimously, and we'll move now to 4B, the procurement process and protocols for the executive recruitment. So Darlene, would you take that one away?
Yes. Okay, so what I have done, I have included in this packet the Housing Authority of the County of Monterey's procurement policy. As you can see, the procurement policy hasn't really been updated in quite some time. But what we're looking at in my conversations that I've had with HUD, so there are what we called simplified acquisition thresholds or simplified procurement. So our internal policy states $100,000 simple procurement threshold. Anything under $100,000, we do not have to do a full RFP, which requires a committee, writing the RFP, posting it, having it posted for 30, 60 days, and then having the committee review and make selections. So under $100,000, we need to get 3 quotes, and from those 3 quotes, we can make a selection. Now, I've also included in the packet, it's a HUD memo M18-18, which that shows that HUD amended the threshold for simple procurement to $250,000. So in HUD's eyes, anything $250,000 and over needs a full RFP. Anything $250,000 below can be 3 quotes, simple procurement. So in my conversations with HUD, since we are in an extreme circumstance, what we have been encouraged and approved to do is an emergency sole source. So what that means is within our threshold of $100,000, anything below $100,000, we can do a sole source directly to whoever we feel is appropriate. So if we have a conversation with a recruiter that we feel can meet the need and can expedite the process because we are in an emergency situation of the director, the finance, and HR, we write a memo to file outlining the importance and the emergence of the issue, and that goes to file, and we can make the selection without doing a full RFP. So if it's over $100,000, which would exceed our limit, then I need to, same process, but whatever I write for the emergency sole source, I must get HUD's approval. So HUD did state, since our policy is so out of date, that we might consider amending our policy to move the threshold from $100,000 to $250,000. Okay, so that is one item that we could consider. Then the next thing would be, okay, if we move to $250,000, that's quite a bit of authority to give somebody without having to do a full RFP. But then we need to remember the executive director, interim executive director, whoever you have, has authority from the board at $150,000. So that limit of $150,000 can be used as kind of an internal control. So what would happen is if we move the threshold to $250,000 for simple procurement, and we kept the ED level at $150,000, we would not have to do a full RFP under $250,000. The executive director could enter into the contract up to $150,000. Anything above $150,000 but below the $250,000 simple procurement would need to be approved by the board. So it does give a sort of control so that, you know, no one's out on the street, you know, engaging us or committing us to a, you know, $250,000 contract. It was HUD's advice that we do an emergency procurement for the recruitment of the executive director and a separate emergency recruitment for the director of finance. So that was their recommendation. So are there any questions on emergency procurement versus simple procurement versus full procurement? It's three different concepts.
Can you talk about the time requirements that an RFP has to be out with simple versus full?
Simple, you do not have to do an RFP. You have to get 3 quotes. You can reach out to vendors within that industry or people that you feel would respond and would give you quotes. So you could give them a scope of work. They respond with an estimate or a quote. You review the 3, you review the company. That moves at a much more expedited fashion. You don't necessarily have to wait the 30 days. Then a full RFP needs to be developed, approved by the committee, posted nationally for a minimum of 30 days. So that speeds it up. And then the emergency sole source means we already have a vendor that we know can handle this on the emergency basis. We go straight to them and enter into contract.
And if it's above 250,000, is that when it becomes a full RFP?
If we amend our policy to the simple procurement threshold of 250, yes, Right now, the way our policy reads, it's at $100,000. So 101,000, full RFP, 30 to 60 days process.
And Darlene, in your investigation of, like with BDO for financial services or with various executive staffing and executive recruitment agencies,
Mhm.
is it your, we haven't asked you to go out and we as the committee or as the full board haven't asked you to go pursue contracts, but
Correct.
has it come up in your conversations, like sort of a ballpark cost on what it would take to get an ED or a finance director for any length of time, or has it not been that detailed?
I have not discussed pricing because I wanted to wait until I actually spoke with HUD on a call to get their blessing on the emergency sole sourcing, just in case they didn't give us the approval and we would have to do an RFP. So we have been approved for that. So we can do it. I met with HUD San Francisco. I met with the director. I met with Gerard and his procurement expert, Todd, who is assisting us with this. So tomorrow will be the first conversations that include dollar amounts.
Got it.
Mhm.
Okay, so for me, it was very convoluted, very complex to understand sort of our legal obligations as commissioners with regard to emergency sole source or emergency procurement, then moving to the next tier of complexity with the simple procurement, and then the final tier being the full procurement. And it took me a little while to get those. So if you have questions, please feel free to speak up. You're not alone. And we have some some serious decisions to make. And if you are not feeling comfortable, by all means, let's get everybody comfortable.
Yes. And HUD's major concern is that we do not make an error in the procurement process. That is their major, major concern.
Darlene, can you go through each one again, just to give it in full detail, one by one?
Okay.
Thank you.
So the Housing Authority procurement policy currently has a $100,000 simple procurement limit. So that means anything under $100,000, we could do simple procurement, which is we can call out and get 3 quotes for service or goods or services. Anything over $100,000, we have to do a full RFP, which means write a request for proposal, have a full scope of work. Then we need to publish that, have a committee review it, publish it. It needs to be published for 30 to 60 days. Then based on the responses we receive, the committee reviews and makes a selection from there. Since our policy has not been updated since 2010, HUD made a revision, which is in the memo that's attached, which is M1818, that they have moved the acceptable simplified procurement level to $250,000. So in HUD's eyes, anything under 250, you could do simple procurement, which would be get your 3 quotes minimum. And anything over 250, do the full RFP process. But since we have not amended our policy, we must default to our policy, which is currently at $100,000. Now, given the situation that we are in, HUD approved an emergency sole sourcing, which means we don't have to even get the 3 quotes. If we have somebody that can fulfill it, who has the specialty. So if these consultants that are very specialized, and this is what they do, and we feel that they can provide the service for us, we can do an emergency sole source under our simplified procurement level and engage in a contract. If it's over our rate of 100,000, I will have to get HUD's approval to exceed our own internal policy. Because we have to have all this for documentation, because when we are audited every year, procurement is part of the audit process. So if we are going to go over our own internal policy, we have to have all the documentation. And if we're going to go over it, we have to have HUD's approval. So does that kind of explain the 100, 250, and then not forgetting that the ED's threshold to bind a contract without notifying the board first is $150,000. Okay. I see Hans has a question.
Yeah, just clarification on the 150,000. Is that our existing internal policy?
Mhm.
So basically, you could go out and bind 150,000, but you'd have to do it through an RFP. If it was like $130,000.
Right now, yes. So like a perfect example, our landscaping.
Mhm.
Landscaping service comes in around 175,000. So we have to do a full RFP, which we had trouble getting people responding to the RFP, but we have to do a full RFP. Since it's over the executive director's 150 limit, we prepared the contract, we come to the board approves it because it's over the ED's limit and it's over the simple procurement. So now if our internal limit was 250, then we wouldn't have to do a full RFP, but the executive director still could not execute. It would have to go through the board because the executive director has a $150,000 limit. So it's a very good cross check so that you don't have an executive director entering into contracts over 200,000 without the board knowing. And right now I think our largest contract is the landscaping.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think for the purposes of, certainly for speeding up this process, it would make a ton of sense for us to raise that limit to, it seems like HUD's in line with that, to the 250, even if it was just temporary.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's item C, but
yeah. And it wouldn't be something we could take action on tonight. We would write a resolution and put it in the packet for Monday, and you would vote then to amend the policy.
Okay.
But it is HUD's recommendation that we could go ahead and change it up to the 250 and have that changed, but to make sure that we do the sole sourcing individually, do not combine the recruitment for the director of finance and the ED together. They are separate emergency items.
Yeah, Kevin and Vivian, any questions or concerns or comments?
No questions.
Okay, then is there any direction from the board toward Ms. Sturgeon so we can anticipate, or we can shape what appears on our Monday agenda next week with regard to the procurement process and protocols for the executive recruitment? Just off the top of my head, we can say, explicitly to the executive recruitment, let's raise the procurement level. We can say only, for a period of time, only for the next 30 days, 60 days, whatever it may be, until we revisit the procurement levels and authority. We could say we're not comfortable with this and we don't want to do it at all. What are folks' thoughts on how we might move forward on this particular item regarding procurement thresholds and limits explicitly for the executive recruitment? I mean, I heard earlier Hans, Vice Chair Buder was in favor of making some changes that seemed to align with what Ms. Sturgeon reported was the opinion of HUD. And then I know that Commissioner Ballesteros and I have had the benefit of being in a lot of meetings with Darlene, or Ms. Sturgeon and Vice Chair Buder, but I don't know if I appreciate that the other commissioners are not present, but we thought it was important to have this meeting, and there were just not other days this week that we thought would work. So, and we wanted to give Ms. Sturgeon the most amount of time in order to respond after we had this meeting, and not have this meeting the day she was leaving, and then she couldn't do anything. So, it's my preference that we direct the next agenda to have a resolution, authorizing some change. But I'm interested in hearing if people are, not comfortable with 250 on simple procurement, if people only want to do 250 on an emergency procurement, and then say, 200 or 150 on the simple. And I mean, like what, I have my own opinions, but I want to make sure that they're not sort of leading, and stifling other people's opinions.
In terms of my personal opinion, I think following the guidelines from HUD would probably be our wisest process forward, following on their guidelines and what is kind of commonplace within other agencies. That would be where my comfort level would lie.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Gama, any comments or concerns on our path forward?
No, I don't have any questions or concerns at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. So Commissioner Ballesteros or Vice Chair Buder, if you, I think it's appropriate for Ms. Sturgeon to have sort of consensus from the board, but I want to make sure that everybody's had a chance to say one way or the other what their feelings are. So why don't we start with Commissioner Ballesteros, and then we'll hear from Vice Chair Buder.
I guess in order, we have to make these decisions, and that's why we're having this meeting. So I feel the same way as Commissioner Haley, whatever what HUD has suggested to us, and then for us to make sure that we follow the procurement process correctly. And I think then I'll be comfortable with that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to upset the apple cart. I have thought at times about, should it be temporary? And, because obviously it's nice to have the full RFP process to the extent, just from a governance perspective, to make sure, obviously simple procurement, you're out there getting 3 quotes anyway, and that's kind of the most important piece, but having something that's posted widely that people can, I think that's beneficial. But I think we can take another bite at that apple whenever we want. And so at this point, let's just do it. And we've got a lot of stuff to get through and move it up. And if we want to move it back down in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, we can do it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I also share a little bit of concern about just sort of a permanent change, given that our housing authority is relatively small and doesn't have a lot of cash on hand or cash reserves. And so, not that we don't trust whoever our future executives will be, but there's a reason why these processes exist. So I would be comfortable revisiting this. So maybe, and I know it's hard to track stuff that's like long range, but maybe we could make a note to like revisit this. I don't know, 6 months sound reasonable with regard to the timing of trying to onboard our new executives? Is it, maybe we can tie it to the next budget, just to include this as a.
You can do that. You can revisit the policy. I would recommend just making the threshold dollar amount change to the simple procurement to the 250 and not tie it to anything, because if we make it contingent upon something else, then that opens the opportunity for error.
Yeah, but, no, not to make it contingent on approval of a budget or some dollar amount within the budget, just to the timing of revisiting it.
Yeah, so we don't want to say it's only for this purpose or only for that purpose. We would just move it to the 250, and then I would say revisit it. What we could do is make that part of the budget process. So the finance committee could be charged with, is it effective or is it not effective? And again, the largest contract being our landscaping contract, which comes in around 175.
Yeah, so let's do that. If there's no dissent, and I welcome if anybody has any reservations or hesitation, that we will direct staff to prepare a resolution for the next meeting that would change the procurement guidelines to more closely align with HUD's recommendations, and then to revisit them separate, but around the same time as the budget in fiscal year 22-23.
Okay.
folks are more or less on board with that, I think that's sufficient since we're not necessarily approving a thing. We're going to approve the resolution in the future. I think it's good to just have direction on that and some clarity around what we're asking. So if I don't hear any other comments or dissent, then we will consider that item dispensed with.
Okay.
Well, let's move on to item C then, 4C, the procurement policy, agency simple procurement thresholds.
Well, we kind of discussed it all together. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that I'm going to tomorrow, as part of the board packet for Monday, the 13th, I'm going to be preparing a resolution that will move the Housing Authority of Monterey County simple procurement threshold from $100,000 to $250,000.
And just for the benefit of the board, I asked Ms. Sturgeon to separate these items out because I wanted to give the commission the opportunity to say, for the executive recruitment, we will do a thing, but it will not necessarily be the same as non-executive recruitment, non-emergency procurement situation. So I didn't want folks to feel like they got pigeonholed into all or nothing and they could separate out the two, but they really are very much overlapping and can be the same thing.
Correct.
So without hearing any dissent or comments or questions or concerns, we will consider the direction from item 4B to apply to 4C. And then let's go back to 4A at this time, and we can have a little bit more conversation around the items that Vice Chair Buder and Ms. Sturgeon shared. Do we want, as a board, do we want to give permission to Ms. Sturgeon to solicit bids from those various folks under the new procurement policy that doesn't yet go into effect until we vote on Monday? So she can't enter into a contract, she can't bind us to a thing, but given that her last day is Thursday, it may be prudent for her to say, hey, consultant one, or hey, expert two, we'd love to work with you. Could you give us make a bid and tell us what it would cost? And I can bring that to my board at the Monday meeting. And once we've adjusted our procurement, we aren't going to wait another 5 days or a week or whatever it is. We've already got an offer at that time. Hans, is that sorry, Vice Chair Buder, is that kind of what you were thinking as well?
Yeah, I think that's super important, just to make sure that the timing is as fast as possible here, especially while we still have Darlene in the interim ED seat.
And then Commissioner Ballesteros, did you have any additional thoughts about sort of, I know that for me in the ad hoc committee meetings, I was trying to condense the timeline because I know that once we lose our interim executive, we'll have to find a replacement interim executive. But Ms. Sturgeon has been doing this work, trying to help us bridge to that next person, that next place for help. And I don't want to necessarily lose her momentum and institutional knowledge. And so I thought it might be good to give her some direction to go seek those out so that we could be prepared at the next meeting instead of starting afresh at the next meeting. Is that, how are you feeling about that that paradigm?
I'm okay. No, I have no hesitation of resisting that. I'm okay with it.
Great.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And Commissioner Gama, just wanted to make sure that it was clear that we're not today telling Ms. Sturgeon, go enter into a contract. We're saying, do some research and get some bids and then put that on the Monday agenda with this new procurement thing so that we have an opportunity to review it, but also so we're not waiting a week or two, or now that she's gone, waiting a month to sort of get our legs back underneath us. Is that making sense to you? Do you, if it does make sense to you, do you agree with that approach, or do you prefer a different method?
Oh, no, it does make sense. And I agree with you with the approach.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then Commissioner Healy, want to make sure that you're feeling confident on understanding that process and that the thing we're trying to achieve?
Absolutely. I support the approach.
Great. Okay. So then, Ms. Sturgeon, do you feel clear on the direction from the board for item 4A?
Yes, we will drop
Okay.
the resolution modifying the simple procurement level for our internal policy. So we will have that done. And then I'll go ahead and continue on with the scheduled meetings that we have with the consultants that came highly recommended through HUD, through the director of the San Francisco office. So, and through Commissioner Booter's efforts and research, that same name kept coming up. So we're going to be having a conversation with them tomorrow to see about, do they have applicants? Do they have a stable of people that they could place? Are they local? Are they not local? How much are we looking at? Get all that information together so that the board can make a clear decision on what they would like to do.
Great. And yeah, I think, as responsive and as agile as we can be, I think that's to the benefit of not just the agency in terms of like a citizen oversight, but in terms of the continuity of operations with the staff. So I think that's going to be the most effective. Any other comments on 4A, B, or C before we move to that second to last agenda item?
Yeah, Chair Wizard, you were, I think, because mine is on sort of that phase one of these three phases, which is once Darlene leaves, it might be prudent for us, since this is sort of our last full board meeting before that happens, to come up with a plan for that kind of interregnum, so to speak, before we seat an interim executive director. I think we have good irons in the fire to find an interim ED. We'll know more in the next day or two about the exact timeline. But that being said, I think it would make sense, and I'm speaking just for myself here, given the institutional knowledge, to try to contract back with Darlene in some fashion for a period of time. And I think it's particularly important before we get that interim executive director in a seat. Otherwise, all of the processes that Darlene mentioned, that honestly I have trouble bringing to mind, letting them know what they are as opposed to getting it done, those things make me concerned. And so I think we basically have two options. We either need to bring in one of these consultants, ASAP, kind of starting like on Friday, who can come in and keep the lights on and fulfill those functions, or we need to contract back with Darlene for a period of time. She could have a longer contract to kind of bridge us, and maybe something more intense for the period of time until we seat an interim ED. But it feels like we need one of those two things in place. And it feels like tonight being our last meeting with her in the interim ED seat and us as a full board might be a good time to address that.
Yeah, I think, I will apologize to the board. I didn't agendize a specific item on how to navigate that. And so I think, just in terms of doing things by the book, we should probably, since it is a contract, we would likely need to execute that during a public meeting, but one that in such a way as that it was noticed for the public to comment. So, we could sort of discuss in broad strokes what it looks like now, and then offer Ms. Sturgeon an opportunity to give that to us for a vote on Monday. And with the office being closed Friday, I don't know that there's going to be, a disturbance in the force, so to speak, if this isn't executed before the end of the week. But certainly, I would like to hear from Ms. Sturgeon. Can the nominal, on paper recorded in executive director, does that person need to have any particular status with the agency? Full-time, part-time, limited term, independent, contractor? Like, what is there? Are you aware of any rules around that?
No, I think what would happen would basically be because I will be relocating to a different state, I could not stay an employee because we are not a multi-state employer. And it's too costly for the agency to register and become a multi-state employer. So therefore, we would move to kind of like a contract basis. The same thing that we're discussing doing through a consultant, you would just do direct. So we would issue a contract. I have questions into HUD with regards to how we would do that, what it would look like. But in brief conversations to HUD, they felt that that was an acceptable bridge while the Board of Commissioners finds an interim ED to sit in. Because again, with their concern being that the contract through HUD flows through the executive director position, not through the board. So making sure that there's someone there to sign how the responsibility of you know, any kind of contract execution, any kind of funding that HUD has, so that is one of their multitude of concerns in a situation. And that would also fall under the emergency procurement. So therefore, you know, like Hans stated in his language, person has industry knowledge, specific knowledge of this position, so we could document the emergency sole source for that. So, because I think it would be a challenge to find any one of these consultants by tomorrow that would be able to find or place anybody next week. You're looking at a minimum of, you know, a couple of weeks before they can find probably an interim to sit in, but we'll have a timeline by tomorrow.
Okay.
And I have written documentation from HUD stating that it would be fine to contract. But in verbal conversations, they said yes, that it would be fine.
Okay. You know, not wanting to leave the store unattended for too long, I agree that it is beneficial to have somebody, you know, and so talk to us, just a question I have, maybe others have had as well. What does it look like instead to appoint somebody else within the agency? How does that work?
You would need to delegate authority and appoint someone else as the interim executive director. So,
and what does that look like with regard to, like, you know, are there any particular HUD rules? I mean, I know that
no,
probably a couple other folks are familiar with this, but I just got a bunch of emails and had to fill out a bunch of stuff from HUD to like get into some system, and it was a pain in the butt. So is there any any particular stuff that we would need to facilitate?
It does become quite complicated to move people around in HUD systems and get this person that authorized here to replace with the person authorized here. So that does take some time. So that becomes quite an issue. I mean, to delegate authority to somebody else. So let's say the next director is Maria Madera. So would that cause a conflict with her being the director over the Section 8 program? So we would have to look at that and see. But changing in the REACT system, realigning who does what, getting new signers on the bank accounts, things like that, it could be time consuming. And then we wouldn't want to get ourselves in a situation where we are halfway through doing something and then we've dropped the ball and we've removed somebody's access, then we don't have access. So it just becomes a little bit of a challenge. So that would be the only concern, is that, you know, would we create a conflict of interest? Because would Maria be able and allowed by HUD to draw down the funds of a program that she oversees?
Are there any other directors in the agency at this time, or are we?
No.
I don't have a deep familiarity with the.
That's the last director.
Okay. So it's possible that it wouldn't be a problem to have Ms. Madera step in while we searched for a consultant, but it's possible that it would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know. I think, you know, there are layers of complexity on what we can do and like what we need to do. So what we need to do and how we can do it is what I meant to say. And it seems like we can get super into the weeds on 1,000 different things,
You
or
can.
we can try to sail up a little higher and not fuss over every detail. And I appreciate, our job is, public oversight. But if we're not going to be in the office every day and physically manipulating the documents and reviewing them, at some point we have to say who we're going to trust and how much. And I mean, that goes back to our conversation around procurement limits. So, I mean, if we had if we had an HR director or a finance director, I think I would be comfortable with them being appointed as the interim. And not that I don't trust Mr. Madero, please, that's not it at all. I'm worried that HUD might say that there's some, arcane rule tucked away into the Code of Federal Regulations that says that she can't do both.
Yes.
And we spent 3 or 4 days trying to get that ship out of the harbor, only to find out that that's it's a non-starter.
Yeah. And with the system that we are getting you into, which is the REACT system, the ELOC system, there are very defined rules that everyone plays. And once you're in one role, you cannot be in another role. So that's where the concern lies, is that if we change her role, who would take her role? And there's no one, you have to be at a certain level. So only directors can pull down funds. Only this person can pull down funds. This person oversees the system. So Maria is kind of our compliance and oversees the system. So for someone that oversees the system to have the ability to draw is a conflict of interest, in my opinion. And that's probably what they would come back with.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there are laws and regulations written down somewhere, but just, talking about it out loud, that sort of gives me a little bit of hesitation to have sort of the person overseeing it have the keys. And again, that's not pointed at any individual, just in terms of a public accountability system and the protocol,
protocol and internal controls.
Commissioner Healy, any thoughts on, do we want to ask Ms. Sturgeon to prepare a proposal? Do we want to, that we would consider on Monday, and maybe as a full board not approve it, maybe as a full board approve it, or something in the middle, come back with a counter offer or whatever it be. But in terms of direction on what we want to do under that update from the Strategic Recruitment Ad Hoc Committee and sort of what our next steps are, is there any particular way you're leaning on how to handle this particular issue?
I think in terms of the continuity of the agency, Chair Wizard, that having Ms. Sturgeon function in that capacity would be the wisest move from my observation and perspective. So I think that's a natural next step, is to have her develop some sort of a proposal that would give us at least the option on the table to retaining her services to help guide the agency through this transition period.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Ballesteros, any comments or concerns about sort of the bridge between today and bringing in that consultant?
No, I'm okay. Whatever is gonna work. And then we're ready on Monday to make a choice.
Great. Yeah, and then Vice Chair Buder, I'd ask you, but it was sort of your idea that launched this part of the conversation. So unless you've got anything to circle back on.
I think the only thing would be maybe in these conversations with the consultants, maybe we should try to get their sense of how fast they could get somebody out here and what their pricing would look like, just so we have a couple different options on the table.
Yeah, timing is going to be the most crucial, and cost of, especially if the proposed individual to sit in is not a local person, because that will change the costing structure.
Yeah, and Ms. Sturgeon, just for your whatever it is that you want to present to the board on Monday, I don't know if you'll, with the time change, if you'll be able to attend and give live, answers if there are questions, but that would probably be the most useful, especially because there's a couple of commissioners who are not in the meeting as we speak. So, I would encourage you to do that if it works out. And then Commissioner Gama, anything to add or concerns you've got with what we've heard from the others so far?
No, I don't have any concerns.
Okay, thank you so much. So a pretty comprehensive conversation. And anything else under the ad hoc committee / procurement questions before we move to 4D? I think that's, kind of thinking back, I think that's really the bulk of what we've been talking about. And the rest is sort of details on how to do what we just talked about. Okay, seeing no hands and hearing no other commissioners, I'll close those items and we'll move to 4D, Monterey County Housing and Community Development Memorandum to the Board of Supervisors. Maybe Darlene, if you want to introduce this from the staff perspective. I don't know that there's much to say, but just whatever it is you've got.
Yeah, so I think this is a public notice that went out that what we call HCD, the Housing and Community Development. So what they have done is prepared a memorandum to the Board of Supervisors outlining the structure of housing authorities, roughly equivalence, what does the landscape look like when it comes to housing authority structure? And then they laid out a series of action items that they think that they have recommended that the Board of Supervisors could take. They also included our 5-year plan, and they also included the HUD memo dated October. So that is actually the report that came out of our HUD monitoring for Pueblo Del Mar. So HUD did a remote monitoring of Pueblo Del Mar for the period of time prior to my joining the agency. And they came up with a series of findings. And so we're writing a corrective action plan. I had received an extension on that. So that is due this week and will be turned in before I leave. And then they've also included a copy of the letter from the Board of Supervisors going to the civil grand jury recommending an investigation of the housing authority based upon the items listed on the page 2. They have about 7 items and 7 concerns that they would like the civil grand jury to look at. It was forwarded to the grand jury with a recommendation, but we're unsure of the status of that at this point. But they did make a small series of suggestions of what could be done. So anything from changing the appointment of the Board of Commissioners to having a Board of Supervisor on a recruitment, or doing nothing and seeing what comes of the 2 reports that are attached, having a full-scale audit. So it was just really here's an entire world of information for you to look at. So I'm not quite sure from a perspective of the Board of Supervisors, what their thought process would be. But from our perspective, it looks like it's information. It looks like here is some data, here's some information for you to start considering if you want to take action in the future. I don't see this as an imminent, next day kind of action document.
All right, thank you. And I would just add quickly that while this is speculative, while there's a pending request from the Board of Supervisors to the civil grand jury asking them to take some action, I can't imagine that the supervisors want to get in front of whatever decision the civil grand jury would make and act before it's publicly known one way or the other if the civil grand jury has chosen to take up that investigation or dismiss the request. So at the earliest, I would think it's whenever the civil grand jury announces what their investigations will be for this current investigative year. And at the latest, it would be after that investigation is done if the civil grand jury chooses to pursue that request. So I just want to reiterate that I also don't think that it's an imminent thing, but I don't know whatever that thing might end up being. Any questions, comments, or concerns from the other commissioners?
Well, I guess what I had asked when we met, I think our last meeting, Chair Wizard, that I was reading it, and I had mentioned that I don't think the Board of Supervisors really know how much time that us as commissioners, we do spend,
Yeah.
and to learn all this. And even regardless, they're the ones that do appoint the commissioners. They could do whatever they want to do. And it was suggested that let our time expire as a commissioner, and then they're going to select a new person. And in my case, I was planning to finish in April of 2022, but to me, whoever, sits as a commissioner, there's so much training, so much extensive training that has to be done. And then, getting to understand how housing works. And I think I had the privilege of attending different conferences as my other fellow commissioners have done also. And us taking, time from our family and our workplace to do that. And sometimes, they only see it as peering through an eye hole of a fence. But then for them to actually see how much is, involved in us sitting, each meeting and asking these questions. And sometimes some of the information goes over our head, but we're still there. And I think sometimes, to me, I just felt like, okay, is this a threatening letter? Can this happen? But, I really appreciate Darlene explaining it, they might not do anything, because the civil grand jury is really the vehicle that can do, if they want to do an investigation. So thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, so we'll keep our eyes peeled for the civil grand jury's publication of their investigations. We'll see if there's anything we need to respond to or anything that we need to do. And maybe it makes sense at some point, depending on how things go, to invite someone from the Board of Supervisors to come chat with us, or hold a joint special meeting to talk about where our organizations overlap and how we can better work together. Or so I'll continue to kind of feel that out, and if something comes up, I'll make sure that everybody's aware of it, and maybe it's better to just schedule the meeting for all of us to interact. So anyway, I think that about covers it, since there's not really much else to, somebody wrote a report, and so we're going to talk about their report. I think that's about it. So I will say thank you to Ms. Sturgeon. I don't know that we will see her like this again until after the board votes on Monday, whichever way that goes. So feel free to call her up when it's not 7 o'clock at night and dinner time / private time, personal time, and talk to her and say goodbye, say hope to not have a long goodbye, whatever it is you're going to do, and we will promptly move to closed session.
All right, so what we'll do, Gabriella, can you move control and host of the meeting to Hans? And then once you're done with the closed session, just text us, and then we'll turn the recording back on when you come out of closed session. That way the recording will download into Gabriella's computer.
Got it.
Okay.
Right, so I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'm going to transfer authority to Hans.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
And then just text me when you're done, and then we'll jump back on and put the recording back on.
Got it.
Awesome. Thank you.
It shouldn't take very long. Just spectacular. So I apologize. I actually did not formally read us in to closed session, but I will formally read us out of closed session, which is that the Housing Authority of the County of Monterey Board of Commissioners met in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, potential litigation. We discussed one item. There's nothing to report. and we met for what must have been 3 whole minutes. So that concludes our closed session, and we will move now to commissioner comments, after which we will adjourn. So does anyone have any commissioner comments to share?
Just want to say thank you to everybody for all the information. Thank you, Darlene and Hans and Chair Wizard. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Kevin, Viviana, Hans, anything for the good of the order? And if not, that's fine too. Just want to offer it.
Just wanted to say thank you to Darlene and best of luck. I anticipate this won't be the last we see and or hear from each other.
Thanks very much. Okay. Well, oh,
Like
go
I
ahead. Thank you.
said- Oh, sorry. Yeah,
No, go ahead.
Darlene, like I said in the last meeting, thank you for everything that you've done for the agency, and good luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
And I would just say, I think we all, especially over the past couple of weeks, I really wish you had stayed, because we've been taking some of the load here. But I would thank you for all the hard work over, since you've gotten here, and certainly, this period of time when you've been shouldering, additional load. I've been doing it for 2 weeks, and you were doing it for a whole lot longer. So just appreciate all that, and yeah, wish you the best of luck. But like Kevin said, I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Thank you. Thank you. It wasn't an easy decision. Trust me.
Yeah, thank you all to the commissioners and to our wonderful staff members for staying late on an extra and normally unscheduled evening. And I really appreciate everybody's hard work and commitment. And of course, it's been wonderful, in this ad hoc committee with Hans and Kathleen, and we really get to see, just how much work there is to do. Given that we've only been talking about this one issue, and it's been taking a significant amount of time and resources. So just thank you so much, Darlene, and you too, Debbie. I know, running these meetings is not nothing. So we really appreciate how quickly you've gotten up to speed and have been able to help us out. So thanks to everybody for their great work, and we'll see you next time. And so this meeting is adjourned.
Awesome.